Hey everybody, this is Darren Van Dam, and you're watching Flick Connection, the show that helps you get more out of movies. And you're used to seeing me recommend movies that are available on streaming, but today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be taking a look at my DVD collection for the first time, and I'm going to be pulling out 10 hidden gem movies you likely have not seen that you can seek out and rent or find on streaming services. But if I find out that any of the movies I talk about in this video are available on streaming services, I'll be sure to put that in the top pinned comment down below, along with the full list of all the movies we're talking about in this video. But let's go ahead and start this list off with my number 10 pick, all the way at the back, with Be Kind, Rewind. Now this stars Jack Black and Mos Def, or at least that was his name when this movie came out, and it's actually directed by Michel Gondry, who was one of my favorite directors for a while, and the other reason he's not right now is he doesn't make movies anymore. But he is most famous for having directed Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, a much better movie than Be Kind, Rewind, but this is a really fun movie and it's family friendly. And it's about a couple of guys who own a video store. That is something that used to exist and really didn't exist anymore when this movie came out. But the little quirk about this video store is they actually film all the movies that they rent there. So they're making remakes of the Back to the Future, things like that they're shooting for no money, and they're renting these out. So this is a really fun movie for people who love movies. It's also kind of a fun way to introduce your kids into the concept of filmmaking. Even if you don't necessarily want them to become filmmakers when they grow up, everyone has a camera today, and it's something kids could potentially get really into if they see this movie. But this is one that flew in way under the radar, and sadly, because this one flopped and a couple of others, I think Michel Gondry's directing career sort of washed up in terms of, directing big movies. But he directed some of the most amazing music videos of all time. Obviously Eternal Sunshine, but Be Kind, Rewind is a gem he did after Eternal Sunshine that is just really fantastic that unfortunately far too few people have seen. Alright. My next pick stars Joseph Gordon-Levitt in a bank heist flick that, again, far too few people have seen, but is an excellent movie, The Lookout. Now this also stars Jeff Daniels, and they are both, I guess you would say, disabled. Jeff Daniels is blind, they room together, but Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character was in a car accident that rendered him basically memoryless. And not quite like the movie Memento, he really struggles with day-to-day life, just remembering basic things, has to leave a lot of notes for himself. Again, it's very, very different from Memento, but some people decide to take advantage of this little fact that he's not going to remember, let's say, a bank heist go down, or who helped orchestrate it, and they use him to help rob this bank, and it ends up being a really clever and intense thriller. His memory loss comes into play. He has to figure out how to outsmart these guys, knowing that he's going to have problems along the way, that he's going to have to leave notes for himself. And as kind of wobbly as that might sound, this movie actually ends up being very tight. It's very well written and very well put together. So if you like movies like that, good, tight thrillers, this one could be well worth spending a few bucks to rent, but it does hop around on some of the movie services from time to time. Aha! Okay, so my next pick is kind of a poor man's Mad Max, although the visuals and things don't really look low budget, it's just not quite Mad Max, but Doomsday is still an excellent flick. Some of you will recognize this from back when Blockbuster was a thing, or Movie Gallery rather. I can't believe they actually charged $15 for like a heavily used DVD. That seems way overpriced today. But Doomsday is one hell of a post-apocalyptic movie. It's got a lot in common with Mad Max because it's in this zone that has been sort of decimated and there's not many people left, but the people that are there have developed into these tribes, very much like later Mad Max movies like Thunderdome or something like that. And this is from the director of The Descent and Dog Soldiers, two really wild bloodfest movies, and Doomsday is no exception. There's a lot of violence in this, but what I really liked about Doomsday is how much things change. There was very different sequences as you jump around sort of in this adventure. They even get a little medieval at times. There's a really high-speed car chase, so there's a big mix of stuff in a movie. Now, I realize this does have mediocre reviews, but if you like my wilder, more violent recommendations on this channel, this is just a real fantastic bloodbath of a movie that's, again, going to be well worth renting. And I don't know that you're going to find it on many streaming services. In fact, I don't know that I've ever talked about this movie. It's been sitting here on my shelf, but I don't know that I've ever seen it available on a streaming service. Ah, there's that Movie Gallery sticker again. I didn't go to movie gallery much, but obviously I went more than once. Here is Seraph Falls. Now, this is a Western starring Liam Neeson and Pierce Brosnan that is just widely underwatched, and I can kind of understand why. I'm going to touch on it lightly here with no spoilers. But this is an excellent manhunt movie from the beginning. Think movies like The Revenant. Pierce Brosnan is on the run. Liam Neeson's character is chasing him down. You don't know who's the bad guy, who's the good guy, and there's some excellent survival sequences in this one, again, that are very, very reminiscent of movies like The Revenant. And then, as you get to sort of the third act, things get a little more, I'm not going to say, things get a little bit odd, and I found that to be a really interesting element of this movie. It's one of the things I really liked about it, but I could see where mass audiences didn't like where this movie ultimately went. However, I thought it was just a cool way to handle this manhunt thing. Because I see so many Westerns, this one did something I've never seen a Western do before, and I just really appreciate that. All right, we're going to upgrade the recommendations kind of in a big way, meaning all the ones going forward are way stronger than the ones previously. Starting with one of the newer releases on this particular list, somehow this is still a fairly unknown movie, Upgrade. Now, this came out in 2018 and was my favorite movie, my number one favorite movie of that year. Another one well worth spending a few bucks to rent if you can't find it on a streaming service you already have access to. But Upgrade is a wild, futuristic action flick. And this is from director Leigh Whannell, who's most famous for having written the first Saw movie. Now, he went on to write a couple of the others and some other stuff, and it turns out he makes for an excellent director. He really did a great job with this movie. It's tight, neat, concise, and incredibly entertaining. In this movie, a man is paralyzed, again, by a car accident, and he's offered this new experimental chip that is going to allow him to move. And this chip does a little more than allow him to move. It actually can take control over his body if he allows it to. It makes for some really wild action sequences that don't look like anything I've seen before. And again, they're all really well directed. That's kind of a rare mix to get all those things in one movie. This movie's bloody good fun. Really fun to watch, and trust me, it is extremely gory at times, but it's clever and interesting from beginning to end. Cannot recommend Upgrade enough. It is a top-tier Darren Van Dam pick. If you've never seen it and you generally love my recommendations, make this the next movie that you rent or find on a streaming service. But again, I will let you know in that top pinned comment down below. Now again, unlike my usual list where everything's available on one particular streaming service, these are just movies I own, and I'm not checking to see where they're available before recording this. Now, you can still access most of these movies even if you don't have every streaming service in the world and don't want to spend money to rent, if you have the right kind of VPN service. And today's sponsor, CyberGhost VPN, is that type of VPN service. Like all VPNs, they keep your web browsing safe, secure, and private. But CyberGhost VPN has specialized servers that allow you to access Netflix, Prime Video, and a bunch of other streaming services in a bunch of countries. And there's vastly different offerings from country to country, meaning some of these movies I'm talking about right now, while they're not available on Netflix to you, they might be in a different country. And CyberGhost is super easy to use, but even if you have trouble, they've got great 24/7 customer support, and they offer you a 45-day money-back guarantee, which means you get a full refund after 6 weeks if you don't enjoy using CyberGhost. But I think you're going to, because you're able to use it on up to 7 devices at the same time, and it's all the different types of devices you're already using to stream movies and shows. And right now, my viewers can pay as low as $2.19. $2.19 a month to unlock way more movies and shows than you could ever possibly hope to watch. I mean, it is a really killer deal. That's why I've continued to promote them here on the channel for so long. I love it. I use it all the time. That's how I watch a lot of movies. I recommend you do the same. But speaking of movies, let's go ahead and move on with the rest of this list. All right, another Blu-ray, not the last Blu-ray on the list, but Hard Boiled is a classic John Woo movie. Now, I say classic, I know a lot of people love and appreciate this movie, but here in America, this movie is still widely underwatched and underrated, and I think action fans, this is a must watch for you. That's why it's so high up on the list. In this movie, Chow Yun-fat plays a detective who does not mind using his weapons. There are a ton of shootouts in this movie, and not just wild, crazy shootouts. I mean, they are wild, crazy shootouts, but they're set up really well. Again, this one's really well directed, and I'll be honest, I think John Woo movies lately are just really confusing, and the action doesn't make a lot of sense, and they can be kind of silly sometimes too. This was him in his prime. This is before he was doing American movies, which some of those were quite good, but this is him at his best. If you want to see John Woo really directing the pants off of a movie, Hard Boiled is the way to go. These shootouts aren't just bloody and violent and over the top. There is just debris everywhere, and keep in mind, this predates CGI being used in movies, or at least being used convincingly. Everything you see in this movie is in camera. All the debris exploding off of tables and the glass, and Chow Yun-fat running with a baby, even though I'm sure it's not a real baby, it's all in camera. Wild stuff. I mean, there are real fireballs getting incredibly close to people or enveloping people in this movie in slow motion, because John Woo loves his slow motion, but it is put to great use here. Again, a wild action movie. If you love classic action movies, especially stuff from the 90s, movies like Die Hard, you have to watch this so you have something to compare it to, because this is really unlike anything that was being made in America at the time, in a major way. All right, so now we're going to switch gears in a big way with a Woody Allen movie that is very, very underrated and underwatched. It's called Match Point. It stars Scarlett Johansson, and it's one of the darkest movies he's ever made. Now, Match Point does have a very slow pace to it, so you really need to be interested in the characters and the story to really, really get into this one, because it takes quite a while before things take off and they get incredibly dark. But in this movie, Jonathan Rhys-Meyers is having an affair with a woman played by Scarlett Johansson, so it's a little bit of a sexy thriller as well, but his life becomes increasingly complicated by this affair, and things, again, get very, very grim. I'm not going to spoil anything, but this is one of those movies where you're going to be completely blown away, not just by the performances, but by the fact that this is a Woody Allen movie. Now, I know he's done some other thrillers and things like this, but he is much more well known for his comedy movies. And this one really has no levity to it. It can be very, very heavy, but it is a very intense and, again, really well-directed thriller. I highly recommend this one, and I know it's incredibly underwatched. All right, so this next one ranks as high as it does because it is a very, very important movie to me. This is the movie that basically introduced me to my wife. I did a full video on this story, by the way, a couple of years ago, back when all my hair was still black. I'll put a link to that in the description. But Four Rooms is an anthology movie with some incredible directors, including Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez, and it's got an incredible cast: Tim Roth, Antonio Banderas, Jennifer Beals, Madonna, Marissa Tomei, Bruce Willis has a cameo in this. Other people are in it. I mean, it's wild stuff. But again, it's an anthology about a bellhop on New Year's Eve. He's played by Tim Roth. He's in this big hotel all on his own, and there's 4 short stories that take place in this movie, all wild sort of adventures he has with some of the guests, and each one is directed by a different director. The last 2 being Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino, 2 of my favorite directors, easily the 2 best shorts in here, and the other ones are quite good, but it just makes for a really fun, interesting movie, and it is really funny. It's really well written.
And a hatchet. A hatchet as sharp as the devil himself is what I asked for.
If you like anything that I've said about it, Four Rooms is a total gem of a movie, but keep in mind, with it being sort of this anthology structure, it's not going to quite feel like a movie. It is going to feel like 4 short stories and not really this big narrative that's glued together really well. However, by the time you get to the end, the final seconds of this thing, as entertaining as everything is along the way, including a really stellar performance from Quentin Tarantino, probably the best performance he's ever given in anything is in this movie. The final seconds of this are just completely satisfying. I absolutely love this. It's a total gem of a movie to watch. If you've never seen Four Rooms and you consider yourself a movie buff, get on it, rent it, find it somewhere to watch. All right, the only black and white one on the list is Christopher Nolan's very first movie, Following. Now, obviously, with it being Christopher Nolan's first, it does have a following. I couldn't help myself. But I know a lot of people have yet to discover this. And if you just completely even forget that it's Christopher Nolan, you just know this is a little black and white thriller about a guy that follows people, it ends up being really great stuff. Now, it's fairly different from a lot of Christopher Nolan movies because the concept isn't as wild. There's no science fiction or anything. But for a movie about a guy who just follows people, this turns into a really interesting thriller. Again, this one gets very dark and it has a very disjointed structure, which is something you could come to expect from Christopher Nolan. He can't just tell you a story straightforward. The editing style of this doesn't seem quite as tight as what Christopher Nolan is able to do today. It's a little bit looser, but that's still kind of what's cool about it. You can see early work from a director like that. That said, though, as weird as the editing and the disjointed nature of the story sort of get with Following, he still did make a very good movie that you can follow. It's just a little bit hard to follow because, again, it's Christopher Nolan. I think fans of his, this is a must-watch. I would even say people who have maybe become a little bit disenchanted with Christopher Nolan, maybe you didn't like Tenet, but you liked some of his earlier work like Memento, you may want to check out Following because I think you're going to like it maybe more than some of his more recent work. All right, and then another big-time director, one of my favorites. This, again, is his first movie. I didn't really plan that. It just, coincidences always happen in videos like this. But Shallow Grave is directed by Danny Boyle. Not only is he an Academy Award winner, he's directed some of my absolute favorite movies. Trainspotting and 28 Days Later are two of them. Sunshine being another one I absolutely love to recommend, but this is his first, and it makes for an excellent thriller. I've actually even heard him in an interview say that this is still his favorite movie that he ever did, mainly because it was so successful. Not commercially, but it was so successful in telling, again, kind of a complicated story. Now, Ewan McGregor is the biggest star in this, but he was really nobody when this came out. And in this movie, he's got two other flatmates, and they come into a bunch of money. I'm not going to quite spoil why, but they come into a bunch of money and then decide to sit on it for a while before they determine what to do with it. And this turns into a really wild thriller about these people not being able to trust each other. Again, this one goes in an incredibly dark direction and it's got a little bit of weirdness to it. It doesn't quite feel grounded and realistic. For the most part, it does, but there's a few things in here that feel a little bit hyper real, but that's what I love about it. It really reaches and develops this really crazy story that feels like it could happen in an extreme case, so it's not really far-fetched, but it's also just incredibly unusual, and Danny Boyle, he's a clever director. This is his first movie, and he managed to make kind of the weirdness of this movie work. It makes for an excellent thriller. This came out in the early 90s, and it definitely does have an early 90s vibe. It does feel dated, but for something you've probably never seen, if you generally like really interesting thrillers, especially if you like my taste and my recommendations, Shallow Grave is a top-tier pick. This is in the Criterion Collection now. This is probably a $30 Blu-ray because they're way overpriced, but you can find it occasionally on streaming services. Again, all the movies I've talked about, there's a full list in the top pinned comment down below. You can go down there and also see if any of these are available on streaming services right now. But if you use today's sponsor, CyberGhost, you can maybe unlock some of these as well, and always keep your eyes peeled for some of these in the future. If you like this, maybe I'll do another one in the future, but be sure to like, comment, subscribe if you haven't. If the video performs well, I'll do another one formatted like this, but I'll keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for watching this special DVD collection episode, and you will see me on the next one.